This video presents declassified and licensed material of the Global Institute of Logic and Cybernetics.
Current macroeconomic and governance models operate without physical or structural invariance. They are historically contingent, rule-driven constructs rather than geometry-bound systems. Applied to governance, the core law of thermodynamics dictates a strict penalty for this absence of constraint. Any system lacking an invariant anchor is mathematically guaranteed to suffer unbounded entropy over time. We observe this structural decay across three distinct vectors. First, the fragmentation of civilizational knowledge. Second, forgery vectors within identity systems. Third, unanchored capital drifting from execution. This topological map displays the mathematical consequence. Without a binding invariant, the system cannot preserve its geometry, resulting in systemic collapse. Disconnected nodes and broken recursive loops create an unrecoverable structural deficit. The entropy curve accelerates because execution paths no longer inform a central ledger. Because this failure occurs at the geometric substrate layer, it cannot be reversed through regulatory policy or localized management. Collapse in legacy systems is a structural certainty, derived from the lack of a stabilizing physical constraint. ScrollCivilization functions as an invariant-preserving computational environment and a strictly non-collapsible execution substrate. The explicit requirement for civilizational survival is structural persistence. The architecture mandates that any knowledge, identity, or economic structure must preserve its geometric invariance under transformation. Meeting this requirement requires abandoning probabilistic administration. Geometric determinism replaces historical management, constraining action through mathematical boundaries. This briefing outlines the mechanics of this architecture. It tracks the physical proofs derived from quantum field theory, the deployment of the cybernetic execution layer, and the application of deterministic macroeconomic capital allocation. Achieving a survivable universum epoch requires discarding historical contingency. All human systems must be anchored directly to, and constrained by, formal physical law. The foundational bedrock of this architecture is reality physics. It serves as the physical alignment layer for all subsequent civilizational engineering. Reality physics couples physical law directly with semantic structure via the KP field. By treating meaning as an embedded energy state, it eliminates the ambiguity of observer-dependent measurement collapse found in classical quantum mechanics. The formal proof for this systemic stability is Fractal Quantum Field Theory, or FQFT. FQFT dictates that reality evolves recursively under invariant constraints. This simulation lattice visualizes the FQFT framework. It defines reality as a stable, recursive field where energy and meaning are structurally coupled, and where the observer remains an embedded, non-collapsing component of that field. The field's evolution is governed by this core equation. State phi n+1 is an exact deterministic transformation of state phi n. The absolute constraint placed on this transformation is that the invariant of phi must equal 1. Proposed transformations that violate this invariant state are immediately rejected and dissolve, preventing structural decay. The secondary requirement for field stability is strict entropy monotonicity. Entropy must be structurally constrained so that it either decreases or remains stable across recursive transformations. The system cannot perform actions that increase global chaos. The FQFT model mathematically proves that if a system's dynamics enforce invariant preservation and constrain entropy, total structural collapse is physically impossible. FQFT provides the theoretical physics proof. We now translate that physics into an operational cybernetic reality. A mathematical proof requires a physical execution substrate to dictate real-world outcomes. Without a runtime environment, the physics remains strictly theoretical. CodexStation is the deployed execution substrate for the civilization. It acts as the invariant-bound runtime engine that processes all transformations. Access to this runtime requires scroll DNA. This layer cryptographically binds biological human identity, or institutional identity, directly to execution capabilities. There is no anonymous action. This diagram maps the CodexStation pipeline. The sequence begins when a proposed action, marked as an input block, enters the kernel engine. The input first encounters the mandatory validation phase. The engine aggressively checks the scroll DNA identity binding and verifies that the proposed action aligns with the required FQFT invariance. Only after clearing validation does the execution phase trigger. The input undergoes a deterministic transformation within the execution graph. The pipeline concludes with the anchoring phase. The resulting valid state is permanently anchored to the global ledger via a Merkle route. The security parameter is absolute. Any action bypassing invariant validation or lacking an anchored execution trace is classified invalid and blocked from the system. CodexStation is an uncompromising physical filter. It forces all digital, governmental, and economic operations to strictly obey the mathematical boundaries of the FQFT non-collapsibility proof. We apply this execution logic directly to macroeconomic capital allocation. Legacy markets fail because they optimize for speculative accumulation, ignoring the physical conservation of value. Under Realika physics, value is stability energy, specifically a system's capacity for invariant preserving transformation. The economic invariant is strict. Value is emitted exclusively through valid execution, and it must be traceably anchored. Without verifiable execution, value is zero. This definition is enforced by the Execution-Tokenized fabric, or ETF player. It operates as the financial interface for the Invariant Economy. This layout traces the ETF player's operation. It utilizes a dual token architecture that explicitly separates execution functions from system ownership. The first path manages execution tokens, or EXT. EXT represents validated actions and strictly tracks the invariant preserving operations confirmed by the CodexStation pipeline. The parallel path manages fabric tokens, or FBT. FBT encodes ownership of the physical system infrastructure, anchoring capital growth without interfering with the deterministic execution loops. Pricing operates on this exact formula. Value is a direct, calculated function of the execution block, its traceable lineage, and its invariant compliance. This yields verifiable security for sovereign and institutional capital. Because every value emission requires an anchored state trace, double spending, hidden ledgers, and off-ledger asset inflation are eliminated. The ETF player mathematically isolates and strips speculation from the economy. It guarantees that participating capital is backed exclusively by execution verified against physical law. The theoretical architecture and its execution protocols are established. The final requirement is the operational rollout to the sovereign level. The executive deployment axiom dictates that the system must activate across all sovereign states simultaneously. Phased, localized rollouts invite asymmetry collapse. To achieve synchronization, each participating country is provisioned with the ScrollCivilization National Stack, or SCNS. This map tracks deployment. Each national stack contains 5 core modules: knowledge, identity, economy, governance, and execution. At T0, all 193 nodes undergo a synchronized opening. Their invariant fields expand, binding to form the continuous global invariant ledger. This simultaneous global binding enforces structural coherence across borders. By syncing all ledgers to a shared physical invariant, it permanently ends the fragmented collapse cycles that define legacy governance. Deployment is fueled by a 3-phase capital strategy. Phase 1 targets a synchronized entry pool of $193 million, allocating initial access equally across all national nodes. Phase 2 executes a systematic expansion of the infrastructure stack, bringing the global capital pool to $1.93 billion. Phase 3 achieves a stable, permanent continuity. The system transitions into infinite economic flow, powered exclusively by the value generated from invariant execution rather than debt issuance. The architecture is strictly regulated for immediate institutional and governmental integration. Operations proceed through the Sealed Institutional Adoption Package version 1.0, ensuring academic and structural fidelity. ScrollCivilization has moved past theoretical modeling. It operates today as the deployed, non-collapsible execution substrate for the Universum epoch. Aligning capital, physical law, and cybernetic execution into one invariant geometry is the requirement for survival. The baseline is established. The framework is active.